Hello, everybody. This is Hondo Carpenter, your Sports Illustrated beat writer covering the Las Vegas Raiders and the host of the Las Vegas Raider Insider podcast. Joined today by NFL royalty, literally. And if you are a longtime Raider fan, you absolutely know who he is. Since the team has moved to Las Vegas, it's accumulated a lot of fans, so you may not. But I'll tell you, when we're done today, you're going to know who this man is. He is very well respected around the National Football League, and people who know the game have tremendous respect for what this man has done. He's been a position coach, he's been a coordinator, he's won Super Bowls. He is considered by many to be an offensive savant. In fact, I was mentioning to someone yesterday that I was going to be interviewing Coach Walsh, and the person said to me that the one of the biggest things that he had to encounter as a coach is he just saw the game differently. And he literally said, this man made people feel stupid because he would see things that others didn't. And I cannot wait for you to get to know the man that I've been getting to know, the great Coach Tom Walsh. Coach, thanks for being with us today.
Well, good morning, Hondo. I appreciate the kind words and hope you're doing well.
I am, sir. So I'm very thrilled to announce to everybody, Coach is going to join us for two podcasts today and tomorrow, and they're going to be phenomenal. So in this first podcast, we're going to talk about two subjects that we've been reporting on and talking about a lot, but we're going to go right to a man who's a much better source than we are. He's been in the middle of it. Today, we're going to be talking about the impact of gambling on the NFL and Roger Goodell's desire to extend the season. Tomorrow, we're going to be getting into, now that the Raiders have two elite tight ends, that is not normal in the National Football League. We're going to look back at some of the best, including the Raiders have done it in the past, how they can utilize that, because this man understands offensive football like very few do. And then we're going to look at all the weapons on the offense collectively. So today we start with Roger Goodell. Now, Coach, to catch you up, we have been reporting for months that it's Rodgers' desire to get to an 18th game, then eventually 19th and a 20th. Here has been my stance after talking to NFL people and players. This is what I've come up with, but then I want to hear your opinions because they're much more valuable than mine. I have heard from NFLPA people that they are very open to it. They have no problem. It puts more money in the salary cap. They love it, but they will not go for it unless preseason games are eliminated. For each regular season, you take out a preseason. And second of all, Coach, they have to have an expanded roster. The NFL believes that the roster's too small, and they're concerned about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on those two thoughts from the players and then your analysis at all.
Well, I concur with the players, and having been in the game since the early 80s when we used to go 2-a-days, 7 days a week, full pads. And then as the game has progressed, the wear and tear on the body's phenomenal. I think that, of course, injury concerns are a major factor. Fatigue is a tremendous factor. And the violence of the collisions, as the players have gotten bigger, faster, and stronger, your contact points and the volume of the hit and the dispersed force from all the contacts have created injuries. Even players who are better trained, better nourished, more physically developed, they run faster, they hit with more power, they have more explosion. Back in the early days, in the early 80s, players had other jobs as a substitute teacher, as a car salesman, as an insurance salesman. Now they work year-round on all those other aspects which I mentioned, and so they are a more finely tuned weapon, theoretically, and that's going to have tremendous wear and tear on the body. And so it has an impact, and it's going to shorten careers. So therefore, they want to back off on more contact in practice. They want to keep fresher legs, fresher arms, fresher bodies. And it's the average player in the league, despite what we hear and we see, if you look at the entire rosters and goes back through the years, an NFL player's career on average is maybe 4.5 years. You start adding more games to that, more contact, more practice time, more Sundays where you're banging heads. That's going to have a degrade the human body and shorten some careers and create more injuries, more opportunities for hurt.
So, Coach, in your mind, as a man who's been around the game, you are universally lauded as an offensive savant. I'm going to ask you, if you're trying to put this together, if you're the commissioner, how big does the roster need to be expanded to? Do you need to get rid of the um, practice squad, or do you need to expand the regular roster and keep the practice squad? What are your thoughts, Coach?
I would like to see the fact that the roster increases by 3 or 4 players, and the practice squad can stay as it is. But the thing about it is, when you analyze the ability to flex your roster, if you know what I'm saying, by bringing up practice squad players to fill in addition, I think the league needs to temper the restrictions on that and allow more freedom for coaches to have ability to bring players up out of the practice squad without having to then put them permanently on the roster, or they lose them because you're only allowed so many times to move a player up. And then if you don't put him on the roster, then he's gone. And I think we need to understand the demands that the league wants to put on players' bodies by increasing games, etc. They have to make allowances for what it's going to have on the physical capabilities of the players.
Coach, I'm curious. I've had a lot of players tell me in the last 2 years that they want to see the NFL come out with a ban on fake surfaces, that all new stadiums moving forward have to have grass. Now that the Raiders have proven it, that you can do it in the desert, it's safer for the players. I'd love your thoughts on that, please.
I tell you, AstroTurf has made strides, or all the synthetic surfaces. I remember we're playing the Oilers in the old Astrodome one time, back when they were the Houston Oilers. And we're at practice on a Saturday with Cliff Branch and guys like that, Hall of Fame players, and they don't even flip the lights up high so we can, balls are coming down, hitting players in the shoulder pads, on the helmets, and we can't see. And then I start to walk around the turf, which was like it was grass laid on concrete. Just, oh my God, so unforgiving on the body. And then the stadium field is in such bad shape, they are putting strips of plywood in the seams where the zippers have separated from how the carpet was zippered together. Now today, if I were going to go out and install a synthetic surface, I would use the cork-filled surface, not the rubber tire bits. I would use cork. However, I think that with these stadiums now are bringing in this World Cup for soccer, and the soccer groups are demanding grass surfaces. I'm sorry, they can put grass in, bring the trays out on Sunday or whatever, grow your grass wherever you want, and then have the interlocking trays so you can play on a grass surface, not play on, regardless of what the astro surface is in terms of what kind of quality of synthetic product you have, you still have to put it on a surface that is unforgiving. Your cleats don't pivot as freely, because on grass, you can bring up clumps. It's like a golfer hitting on an artificial surface as opposed to hitting on sod in the fairway. You may have a divot here or there, but yet think about the shock of hitting the golf club and banging it on turf. Well, think about your foot and your body strike on the ground, and then the ability for the turf to not pivot or give up a clod of grass. Whereas to prevent the injury, when you're on grass, you can tear up a piece of sod when your cleats pivot and everything, so that your legs and your knee and your hips move freely.
Coach, I want to dig into another place, because we're talking about expanding the roster, making the season longer. Years ago, I had the opportunity to spend some time with literally a legend, a baseball legend. And the man said to me, we were talking about the game of baseball. This was in 1999 that I was at his farm in Hartshorn, Oklahoma. And he said to me that the game had changed, because it used to be when he was a pitcher, that, you absolutely, you had to pitch yourself out of messes. You had to learn how to pitch. There wasn't pitch counts. And he said, now the game isn't even the same. And then he said, the more you expand baseball and keep adding teams, he goes, there are guys now that when I played would have been single A ball players. He goes, and I don't even know what my numbers would have been. He goes, I literally have no clue what my numbers would have been because I went against great players every week because there was less. Are you concerned as a man that loves this game, as a man that gave 40 years of his life to this game, Coach Walsh? Are you concerned that the more they expand, they are making the game of football less what America fell in love with?
Well, Hondo, that's a great point because the thing about it is, if you go back to the beginning, there were fewer kids playing football today. Then every year you start to see a decline in the numbers of junior All-American, Pop Warner football, all these different little leagues that are out there, associations. So you have fewer players playing. So now, and as the natural attrition, as you go forward, you're going to have a smaller pool from which to choose. And you increase the number of teams and you put a greater demand on bodies to play. Naturally, you're just by process of simple mathematics, you're going to potentially have fewer great players, great superstars, and you basically are diluting your product. You're stretching it, you've gone to the point where you've increased the number of teams, but do we have enough of the quote unquote potential superstars? And then also, I think the game has been hurt as well because we now have less practice time, less meeting time. So how exotic, and plus now with free agency, transitions of players from roster to roster. I tell you a great story, Hondo, on this, and this pointed to it. Brett Favre was talking to me one day about the playbook at Green Bay. And he says, Coach, every spring we have to start on page 1 in the playbook because we have 12, 13, 14 new faces. He says, I don't even get to the middle of the playbook, and let alone in all my years, I've never gotten to the back of the playbook. So now think about what that does to the great player, the Peyton Mannings, the Tom Brady's, all the great quarterbacks who have tremendous gifts and tremendous talent. Their performance on the field is restricted by how much of the offense a coordinator can install because of all the new bodies you got out there. You got to start on page 1. Well, with our restrictions on practice time, on meeting times, and all that, how far along are you going to get in the playbook? How deep can you dive into the intricacies of the passing game, for example? And notice that how much more simplicity there is today in the run game than there has been previously. You don't see the old Green Bay sweep. You don't see all the exotic pulling schemes, which require time, repetition, and continuity. And now it's all inside zone, outside zone, cut back, once plant your foot in the ground, make a single cut, hit and go. And so when you have restrictions in your practice times and you have new players coming in and going, there has to be simplicity in what you're teaching because you don't have time for the reps, for the sophistication and the precision that is required in a more exotic offense.
That's really good stuff. I wanted to say a couple things. First of all, the pitcher I was talking about was Warren Spahn, as you remember, and it was not 1999. I apologize about that. It was earlier than 1999. Just going through my head, I'm getting older, Coach. But yeah, when he told me that, I thought that was brilliant analysis on his part. All right, I want to, before we get to gambling, I've got one other question I have to ask because we're talking to the great Coach Tom Walsh. If you're young and maybe you're not familiar with him, or maybe you're a new Raider fan since they've moved, just go Google him. That's all you got to do. It'll tell you everything you need to know about this man. His resume in NFL football speaks for itself, and he's iconic. Coach, Aiden O'Connell last year, the Raider quarterback. So he doesn't get OTAs, training camp, or mini camps to prepare for the offense that AP that Antonio Pierce wants to run. So he takes over with half the season left. They change the offense. They go to a zone scheme. They change everything. Now, most fans don't understand, and it doesn't mean because they're bad. I can't tell you about a doctor or a lawyer or a fireman because I don't work in that field. It's not because they're dumb, they just don't work in the field. I tried to explain to fans, you come in on Monday and it's treatment. Tuesday, you watch the film. Wednesday, you get your playbook for the week and you try to install in the classroom. And Thursday, you get to practice on the field. For them to try to overhaul the offense in the middle of the season, and yet he still finishes the last 5 games, nine touchdowns, 1 interception. We understand they didn't ask him to do a lot because they couldn't. But I had one NFL executive say to me recently, if Aiden O'Connell had been a first-round pick, nobody would have been saying the Raiders needed to draft a quarterback. He said, with what he did for the circumstances, I don't think you can say he's a definite QB1, a Peyton Manning. He said, but I don't think you can say he isn't. And the Raiders are being smart, trying to figure out what they have. What's your analysis of that and Aiden O'Connell, please?
Well, I'll say this. Quarterback is a game of repetition. Okay. It's all about reps. How many reps? And you look at the players who are able to transition. I'll tell you, a classic case is take Brock Purdy for the 49ers. He played, I think, at least 3 years of high school ball as a starter. He started almost 4 years at Iowa State. Okay. Now, he played in pretty decent competition. He had the exposure. You get into the NFL, and your quarterback basically defines the limits of your offense. So the important thing for me is that with a young man like Aiden, I'm going to design packages around what he can do now. It's like I've got to realize he is the quarterback we have, and I look at his skill sets and I say, okay, now how is he successful? How can I enhance his levels of success? And I'm going to feature those aspects to allow him to show his best talents. And simplifying the run game and the checks the line of scrimmage and not having all the can and the kill plays and everything, and giving him the best possible play and say, okay, and here's a check to which you can go as a backup. I'm not going to give you, a laundry list as long as your arm, but we're going to get you in and out of the play, and then we're going to get you to the next play, and just make good choices. If you have to be a check down guy, check it down, and let's move on to the next play. Johnny Unitas, another great quarterback, and I was back in the early 70s, talking with him at practice, the Charger practice one day, and I was kidding him. And he says, Tom, he says, hey, the ball is not on a string. It's not like a yo-yo. You throw it with conviction, throw it with that you mean it. And he says, learn from it and move on to the next play. And I've always kind of adopted that philosophy. You can't always call the perfect play. You can't always, as a quarterback, execute the perfect read, the correct decision, but you got to get the majority correct. But, learn from it and move on. So I would take Aiden and I'd say, okay, now what can you do? And a classic case reflecting about quarterback development where Aiden is, I remember when Bill Walsh was with the Browns, the Bengals, when they were the new expansion franchise, they drafted a quarterback named Greg Cook, who played at the University of Cincinnati. Well, he gets steamrolled in a ball game with the Kansas City Chiefs, gets injured, of course, loses his shoulder, he's out. And they ended up with another quarterback the following year. And Bill had to change his entire philosophy. Having been the running back coach at the Raiders back in the day, he was running the Raider offense, Basically, the Raiders were running Sid Gilman's offense, who was like my adopted stepfather back in the early 70s when he kind of took me under his wing. So then Bill had to transition with Virgil Carter to a whole new pass offense based upon what he could do. Same thing he did with Joe Montana. Well, I do the same thing with Aiden. We can find ways to make him successful and feature what he can do. You got some great talent at the receiver core. A quarterback's best friend, number one, is the run game. Number two, I got to protect the kid. So pass protection is a premium. I don't want to have sight adjust. I don't want to have free blitzers dogging him. I don't want to overload protection where we can't pick up people and he's back there, peeling eating it like a banana. You can't salt and pepper the thing. You got to get it in and out of your hands. So I've got to design a scheme that allows him to have quick receivers and quick releases. And we get into the pass game, and back in the day, heck, we threw a 3-step drop and we threw a 7-step drop and we threw play action pass. And then, it was one and done. Our idea of a drive in the old days was give me a one and done shot. We're over the top. We're going deep. That was our mantra. That's what it was all about, with Cliff and other great receivers. And, with Aiden, give me a what I call a mixer in my passing concept. Give me a quicker game on this side and give me another progression over here. I can draw a line down the middle of the field and have a concept to the left and a concept to the right. And then he can make a choice based upon front, stunt, coverage, secondary look, and all that, to which side of the field he's going to go. But he's got a combination that fits over here and another concept over here. So I can have a quick concept on this side, a deeper concept over here, a 3-step progression over here, and a 5 or a 7-step timing progression over there, and let him choose to which side to go. And that way you have an answer for pressure. I've got a quick release. So now he doesn't have to take the same rhythm, the same drop all the time. The offensive line can set firm, and then the kid can bring the ball out whenever he has to. Or when pressure shows, I've got a sight adjust, I've got a hot route, I've got someone breaking free so he can get the ball out of his hands and allow those players to run and make the plays for him.
Now, we're talking to Coach Tom Walsh, who just gave you a brilliant analysis of how he would work with Aiden O'Connell. And he just mentioned something that those of you who listen every day heard me talk about earlier in the week, about coming to the line of scrimmage with a concept for the right and the left based on what the defense does. We're going to get more into that tomorrow. And trust me, you're not going to want to miss tomorrow with Coach. So, Coach, let's now turn our attention to gambling. There's a lot of frustration among players. And I'll share with you why. You certainly understand the coach's standpoint in the game as a whole. But I had one player say to me, I can't be held accountable for what my family does. I know that I can't gamble. I know I shouldn't gamble, and I don't gamble. But now I can be held accountable. In some states, I'm legally allowed to bet on certain games, or at some leagues, you can bet on other professional sports, not yours. And this is what the player said to me. The rules are so ambiguous that it's like we're in the wild, wild west. You are concerned about this, and I think everyone who loves the game is. Obviously, the NFL wants the money. Obviously, there was a long time in your career. Al loved Vegas, but their NFL, there was no shot anybody was coming to Vegas. Now, gambling's advertised in the stadium. It's advertised on the people's phones, television, radios, all of it. Please, Coach, give us your insight and concern about gambling in the National Football League.
Well, the bottom line, Hondo, is that you look at what's happened, like even in the NBA. A player just got suspended for life and banned for life. They have these props that all those who are affiliated with gambling understand about a player. In the basketball thing, it was how many 3-pointers, how many this, how many rebounds, how many assists, and how many catches. Then the player pulled himself out of the game, and they found that there were these huge props on him and the guy came under on all of them. Was it an over? Is it an under? And now in the NFL, you start to think about when you watch players who a ball's hitting the ground and the ball's throwing right there, and the kid's, right there in between the 8 and the 7 on his jersey, and it's on the carpet, you begin to wonder now, what's going on. So you have to have a concern. The league right now has allowed the dollar of volume presented through all of the sponsorships and the naming rights and all of that stuff. Money has spoken, but the league does not have a good plan for implementation of the restrictions, the rules, the regulations. There's no consistency. And the problem also is that a certain person sitting at the top of Park Avenue is the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And you have one person wearing three hats. And I don't know what kind of legal expertise they have behind it, but your players who talked about the inconsistency, it is inconsistent. But that's because it was not a well thought, well contrived, and well conceived plan ahead of time. They allowed the dollars to grab the green, and now they're working in a patchwork concept as events happen to try to legislate and regulate predicated upon the incoming tide. And they're not ready for it. It's high tide, and they did not prepare for high tide.
Coach, I was told by several players, I was told by one, and then I presented it to several players, that they think the next CBA is going to be different than we've ever seen. And I said, what do you mean? And they go, because on this one, we are not going to look for a commissioner who's God. There's going to have to be some checks and balances against the commissioner. I was told by one very famous player, we will not settle for another CBA where Roger Goodell is God. He can be commissioner, he can't be God. I found that fascinating. Can you tell me what you think?
It's true. I mean, I can go back into the early '80s when Paul Tagliabue was the commissioner, and of course the lawsuit, that we had, and it's a situation where the game is so complex, so many different categories, horizontally. I don't see how any one person, Roger could be the CEO, or the next commissioner could be the quote unquote CEO, but you have to have a panel underneath them across the board where individuals and commissions are able to have significant input into the actions, into the structure of the rules and the regulations. And he could be at the top, and he could be the face of the league and be the spokesperson and all that, and then delegate, and then have a consortium of minds coming together, crafting a plan.
Very, very good stuff here.
It's not a one-trick pony anymore. You can't have one guy wear the hat. It's like, I tell you, same thing now. I look at Andy Reid, for example, and think about, here's the man now in this game today who's the head coach, also the offensive coordinator, the play caller. He is. I'm sorry, but Andy is. I know other guys are helping, and it's a joint effort. But see, the thing about it is, Andy also has media. He's got the talks with the trainers. He's got to talk with the owner. Got to talk to player personnel. Got to talk to the GM. It's the same thing with the commissioner. You've got so many. Your plate is only so big. It's like going to the buffet. Your plate only is going to hold so much. You've got to be able to pick and choose what you're going to put on your plate, to which you can eat and digest. Well, the same thing as the commissioner in terms of how he's dealing with the league. He's got to have other people. He's got to have pods working with him, and then together they all work as a unit.
I agree. All right, Coach, last question I have for you, and then you're going to join us again tomorrow. But there's a lot of talk in the NFL about it being fixed. Now, I'm going to tell you my take on it. I have friends who are players, coaches, executives, and refs. And I know them to be men of integrity. I know them to be men of character. And not one of them is a cheater at all. But this is what I keep hearing, and I would love to get your point. And I've even mentioned this to a ref, and all he said to me was, he literally didn't say a word. He just went, is that the league could be so changed by just one ref, one umpire, one back judge, just one being told. And we've seen it in the NBA with Tim Donaghy, where he talked about this is what the league wants. I'm not too foolish to think it couldn't happen in the NFL. And so the thought process that I hear from people that I respect, no, we don't think it's league wide. No, we don't think it's everybody. But we do think it could be a small group influencing the league, especially in the playoffs, where certain referee groups continue to do more games the deeper into the playoffs. I would love your thoughts on this because nobody would know better than you.
Well, Honda, that's a great subject. I mean, that you talk about Pandoras Box. I mean, you open up a huge can of worms in that thing. The thing about it is, you have human beings who are officials. That brings in interpretation. So it's like the greatest controversial call to be or not to be made, in my mind, is pass interference. What constitutes pass interference? Well, you have a rule in the rule book A, B, C, D, but yet it's up to the interpretation of the people who see it on the field at the time. So you can be speaking the same language, but then how is that processed by an individual, and what in his eyes at that moment, or her eyes, now that we have some ladies in the game as well, wearing the black and white stripes. I go back to the Saints-Rams playoff game a couple of years ago where, a receiver was just blatantly interfered, no flag. The team's not going to Super Bowl. And they've tried to bring in replay, etc. And really, to be honest, a challenge is really the only way to correct that. And then I, for one, think that even though you have referees at practice and you have it in preseason games and you bring them in to talk to the players, and the league sends out videos and everything of what constitutes this penalty, what constitutes this one. And, it's like the other classic thing is, how much are you willing as an official to throw the flag if it's at the point of attack? That's different than from being 35 yards away and having no impact on the play. See, that's another thing that's a great factor. There are penalties which you can call from your television screen or from your seat in the press box every play, but yet a flag may not be thrown. There's a judgment about how severe and to what impact it has on that play as to whether the flag will be thrown or not. And so you have individuals, you have human element involved.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you're aware of my very good friend and mentor, Rick Goslin, considered by many one of the best NFL writers of all time. Rick said that he believes you take your referees and make them full-time and pick Dallas or pick wherever, where that's where they spend all week. And they're watching film from the week before, and then they fly from there to the city, and then they come back and everybody's held accountable. Everybody's in the same room. He said with them not being together during the week, they can all get different statements from the NFL, but there's no continuity of thought. When everybody's in the same room, everybody's seeing the same things, everybody's hearing the same words. He thinks that makes the NFL better. And he says at this point, there's so much money to say that you can't do it because of cost is stupid. What do you think about Goslin's thoughts?
It's correct. The thing about it is, it's about the money. And now, if I bring in officials full time, I'll tell you, there's officials now who are CEOs, who are lawyers, who are superintendents in school districts, they're principals. They're working their real job all week, and now they're the only part-time players in this profession. And they each have a whistle, and they're out there, and they're controlling the game theoretically, calling what a penalty is, enforcing and making interpretations. But they're the only part-time employees in the whole league. But it comes down to money, as you mentioned. And think about it this way: the owners are thinking, no, we got to pay officials, then we have to pay workman's comp, we got to pay retirement, we got to have this, we got to have that. Well, that takes away from the pool that goes into my bank account, that goes into my back pocket, that goes into the value of my franchise, that goes into me, padding my wealth. And right. Until they decide that the game is that significant that they're willing to make that investment and funnel the funds, redistribute their wealth to a part of the game to where it has a tremendous impact on the outcomes, we're going to be stuck with what we have.
Okay, last question for today, but you perfectly segued into it. I got to ask. I recently had somebody who is employed in the NFL say to me, if you really want to make the game safe, which is what Roger Goodell says all the time, get rid of the defensive back can only have contact for the first 5 yards. He said, when you get rid of that and go back, and he mentioned the old Raiders, where those that Al Davis had fast DBs who were on you the whole way. He says you eliminate a lot of the big collisions with safeties coming up or guys getting hit coming across the middle because there's contact the whole way. He said, this person said, I don't believe that it's about safety. They want points because that's ratings and that's money. If it were really about safety, there wouldn't be a 5 yard rule. It would be you can have your hands on them the whole time. What do you think of that as an old school guy?
I tell you, let me tell you that go back into our younger years, coaching, even in the early 80s and before that, your receivers had to be big bodied people. You look at the Otis Taylors and some of the other great receivers, they were 6'2", 6'3", they were 225 pounds, but you could bang them all over the field. You can't have these little gnats out there playing wide receiver back in those days because they get squashed like a bug with contact from corners who could put their hands on them and plaster them and play them like a piano. And our Soul Patrol, which is what our secondary was back in the day, Willie Brown and all those great players and Jack Tatum. Oh, you paid. You came into the middle, you got laid out, but it was legal, but now it's all about contact, it's all about collision, it's all about injury, and they want to play a hands-off game. The joke has become now you got to play the game with the high heels and skirts. It's a non-contact sport. You touch a guy now, bang, it's illegal contact, 5 yard penalty. Now there are blatant incidents where that deters a receiver from running his route and you have obstructed him illegally. That should be a penalty. But I just the sophistication of the game, the speed of the players, and the velocity of the contact has changed dramatically. And the league has yet to totally get engaged in that fluid movement and the acceleration of which the game is being played. And the other thing about which I have a concern, to be honest, is I worry about how adept and athletic the officials are to keep pace with the fast moving game, to stay up with the players. I mean, we got guys who could run like the wind now at 4-2, 4-3, 4-3-5. And then you got a 50-year-old guy wearing a striped shirt trying to run down the field, tracking the receiver and the kickoff return or whatever. And the guy's running like he's got a safe on his back because he can't keep up. And how many good calls can you make when you're, reading the Nike on the back of the kid's cleats rather than being up there where you want to be? You can't stay up with them. The speed of the game has just passed by the speed of the officials.
Amazing stuff. I told you people you were going to love Coach Walsh. I undersold it. If you didn't more than love this, you just don't love the game of football. He's a Raider icon, an NFL, offensive savant. What a treat. You don't want to miss tomorrow. We're going to talk about the Raiders having 2 elite tight ends. We're going to look at all the weapons on the Raiders, and there's going to be more with this guy, the great one, Coach Tom Walsh. Coach, thanks for joining us today. Can't wait to have you back tomorrow.
Hey, Hondo, I love it. I appreciate it. And thank you for contacting me. And you got a great show. You're doing great.
All right. See you tomorrow.